I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, it's VLGA Connect and Local Leaders Time again, and I'm delighted to have with me today the Chief Executive at South Gippsland Shire Council, Kerryn Ellis, who I know pretty well, and it's great to see you. Kerryn, welcome.
Thanks, Chris. It's lovely to be here.
And of course, you've been around the local government sector for a long time, and I want to talk about that. It hasn't been purely local government, of course, but our paths crossed a few times, particularly with LG Pro when I was helping out there for a little while. You're still involved with that organisation?
Yeah, I am. I've had a long involvement with LG Pro now, actually, and a really enjoyable involvement, actually. It's an organisation that I really support, but I'm still currently a board member through until December this year when our elections happen.
Oh, election time. And of course, I want to talk a bit about elections too, because from a council point of view, elections aren't that far away also, just a little over a year. And of course, a fairly unique situation at South Gippsland. You're one of a handful of councils that was under administration for a time, and you've been back with elected representation for just a little while. How's that transition been for you?
Yeah, we had administrators for a little over 2 years, and then we had our elections in October 2021. So we're coming up to 2 years now with our new councillor group. We had 8 out of 9 that were brand new to local government, no prior local government experience, which meant that the induction and transition processes needed to be quite extensive, but it was also a really positive thing, I think, for South Gippsland in the sense that we had a complete fresh start, which I think was really what the council needed. Really interesting from the perspective, I think, of both the community and the organisation, that having that fresh start was really valuable, and it's brought a range of new perspectives to council, which has been terrific. And now, they're only a year away from the election. In one sense, it's a shame they didn't get the full 4 years because they're really just hitting their straps now. But I'm really hopeful that a number of them will stand again, and hopefully they do get re-elected to give them that opportunity to have a bit longer.
That's really good to hear, because I did want to ask you, there's been a debate, I think, for quite some time about whether the 4-year term for councils was the right move, going from the 3 years that it used to be. And some CEOs will tell you that last year in a 4-year term is pretty tiring and pretty tough on the councillors and the organisations. Are you seeing perhaps benefit of having that shorter term? Because, as you say, they're really just hitting their strides now.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, as you mentioned up front, Chris, I have been in local government for quite a while, and I do remember when the terms were shorter, and I think there's pros and cons. Certainly 4 years is a long time, and if you're a councillor that's into your second term, 8 years is a really long time, and a lot changes in that time.
Sure.
But I think for us, with such a new group, I actually think 4 years would have been great, just simply because it really takes a couple of years just to get your head around the complexity and breadth of local government. And I think for the councillors to really understand what their role is in a very complex system. And I would say our group, who are very bright and capable people, are probably just at the point now where they're really understanding how best to have an impact and what their unique role in that system is. So it would have been really nice for them to have that extra year, but on the same or on the flip side, I suppose they are fresher. It's certainly true that the 4th year is a challenging year in terms of just keeping that momentum going.
We've talked to Lucy Roffey at Central Goldfields for another episode of Local Leaders, and I know that she valued the input and the advice from you around your transition process. How challenging was it from an organisational point of view to go through what was a pretty short period of administration and then adjust again with the return of elected reps?
Look, it was very challenging. As I mentioned, the organisation or the councillors were dismissed in July 2019. I commenced in my role in March 2020. Obviously, administrators had been appointed by that stage. So the organisation had had a very, very challenging 3 or 4 years with the previous council. And some staff had experienced some really quite inappropriate behaviour and had been very much exposed to that tension that was there in the chamber. Other staff who might not have had a lot to do with the councillors were on the receiving end of people in the community that were very, very critical of the councillor group and not necessarily able to distinguish between staff and councillors. So, you know, some of our outdoor staff out there wearing the logo were abused, spat on. It was pretty horrible. So it's probably fair to say that when I joined the organisation in 2020, on the back of a lot of change, the council being dismissed, Tim Tamlin, my predecessor, the previous CEO, had departed, an interim CEO in place, administrators coming on board. The organisation was pretty bruised and was also quite change fatigued. But luckily, nothing big happened in March 2020, not a pandemic or anything like that. So, you know, it was a period of a lot of change and a lot of challenges, and we really did need to use that time leading up to the 2021 election to just give the organisation some space and some calm and a chance to, I think, have their story heard by a new leader, but also they really wanted reassurance that we weren't going to dwell in the past and that we were ready to move forward. And I did a lot of work, and I was actually very ably supported by Steve Cooper, who I know is a regular on your program, just around helping the organisation to reset and build their confidence, not only in the election process and the decision that community would make as to who they wanted as representatives, but also to build their confidence in me as a new CEO, that I would provide them with the support that they needed through that transition. And we also did a real reset around just good governance 101. What is actually the role of the council? What's the role of the CEO? And what's the role of the staff in supporting the community? And that process was really valuable and successful, but it was challenging because I had to deliver it all as a brand new CEO, literally from my dining table. I wasn't able to meet with many of my staff face to face for probably almost the best part of my first 12 months. So look, it was challenging, but it was a really important process that we needed to go through.
Yes, I was going to ask you about being a first-time CEO in a council under administration, let alone, I'd forgotten, to be honest, can you believe it, about the pandemic. How does a new CEO approach that challenge? What did you do to prepare yourself and have the resilience to get through that?
It's a good question, because in retrospect now, I actually sometimes can't believe that I did it, because it really at one stage did feel like it was just one thing after another. But I think at the time I just, it's one foot in front of the other. And it's just I was reminding myself that, I've been in local government a really long time. The best thing about the sector is that you're not alone. There is always someone else that's grappled with a challenge that you're grappling with. And people are so supportive and so collegiate. And there's always someone at the other end of the phone that can give you advice. You mentioned Lucy Roffey before, and Brendan McGrath at Wangaratta. They were the two CEOs that had most recently come out of administration, and they were incredibly supportive to me, but also to my organisation in terms of just sharing what they learnt and the process they went through. And I think the main thing for me was just being really authentic with my team and saying to them that, this is actually a really new set of circumstances for all of us, but we're doing it together, and I was there to support them. And I was certainly really keen to reassure them that I understood that they'd had a really challenging time, and I wanted to make sure that we were setting ourselves and our new councillors up for a different phase in South Gippsland's history and setting them up for success. And a lot of it was just listening, being prepared to listen and to understand and have empathy for what people had gone through. And the other element for me, if I'm really honest about it, was I probably got to the point after about 3 months in the role where I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm trying to reset an organisation from my kitchen table, not even able to be in the building. And I had a couple of really trusted advisors who I deeply respect that basically gave me a bit of a kick in the bum and said, well, this is it. You can't pick your time. This is your time. And that election deadline is a pretty fixed one. It's going to happen. So do the best you can. And that really changed my mindset to go from, this is hard, why is it happening this way, to this is what it is and we're going to nail this. And in the end, not perfect, but I think we did a pretty good job.
So you've sort of gone towards answering the next question I was going to ask, which was about, I know you've been through one of the LG Pro, I think Emerging Leaders some years back.
Emerging Leaders and XLP.
And
I'm
XLP,
a graduate
right.
of both. Yeah.
So you've got two networks there that no doubt are still reasonably active. But what do you do to keep fresh and on top? Do you have a coach, for example, personal and professional development?
I was really fortunate when I was first appointed to the role that the council at the time, which was made up of administrators, were really keen to support me to be successful, particularly in that first year. And they were happy to provide or support me to have a coach for the first 12 months, which was absolutely amazing and made so much difference in terms of my ability to not get stuck in that sort of mouse wheel of the day-to-day, which can be a real trap, and to keep my focus on the longer term and the transition that we needed to make. So that was terrific in the first 12 months. But the way that I describe my approach to, I suppose, my own leadership development is that I have a board of directors. I have a range of really highly trusted people that have different skills and different backgrounds, but they're all people that I really trust to go to for advice and support. And I'm really grateful to that group of people, some of whom are, as you say, people I've met through Emerging Leaders or XLP or the LG Pro board. Others are former leaders that I've had the privilege to work with, and others are people that are completely outside the sector and bring a totally different perspective. But having those trusted advisors that their only interest is supporting you to do well, but they will also be honest with you when you need it. I think that's really important as a CEO, because it can be a lonely job. But the other thing is it can also be a job where sometimes people won't tell you what you need to hear if they think it's going to be difficult. So you need to make sure you've got people in your corner that will be honest, even if it's hard to hear.
So as we said at the outset, you've been around local government for a long time. I think, well, if you looked at your LinkedIn profile, I'm not sure if you're telling the full story there. It's all councils except for a little sojourn off to IBAC at one point. Just tell us about your journey. Why local government in the first place?
Like many people, it was a complete accident. I started in local government in 1997 with a 2-week temp appointment at Bayside City Council in the customer service team. I was at university at the time, and I was doing temp work as a way to support myself through university. I'd been at Telstra, I'd been at a range of government departments, and it just so happened that they sent me off to something called Bayside City Council for a 2-week temp role, and 26 years later, I'm still here. But it was a really fantastic, serendipitous, but something I'm really, really grateful for that I was placed at Bayside, because it was a real eye-opener for me. Walking in the door the first day, I sort of had a vague idea that councils, I think they collect the bins and maybe they do some other things. Didn't really have any idea. It wasn't a ratepayer myself at the time. And it was a real eye-opener. And what I really loved about Bayside, and I've subsequently realised that it's actually a characteristic of local government right across Victoria, is that there are a lot of women in professional roles, which was an eye-opener, having come from Telstra at that time where that wasn't the case.
Right.
There are a lot of women leaders, and also the culture was really supportive, and people genuinely were there because they wanted to support the community, and I just loved it.
So at what point did you realise the career development opportunity that existed in the sector?
I applied for, when I finished university, I'd been working in customer service that whole time, but when I finished university and decided I probably needed a full-time job, I applied for a job internally at Bayside, which was in what was then called the Client Services Department, because this was back in CCT days, but it would now be called procurement. And that was really probably my first step into a permanent role in local government that I really saw opportunities to grow and develop. And I was really fortunate to have a great coordinator and a really supportive manager in that role that did support my growth and development. But to be honest, the thing that changed local government from being just a job to being a career for me was completing the Emerging Leaders program, which was in 2005 with LG Pro. And that really opened my eyes to the breadth and depth of what local government does right across Victoria, and the fact that whilst we all do similar things, we do them in a way that's relevant and appropriate for the community that we're working with. And I found that absolutely fascinating, and I really loved that network of contacts that I developed, and the fact that even though we were all in different departments, we were all had different backgrounds and different professions, we were really motivated by the same things and we shared the same values. And I still think that's true to this day. And it's been very, very rare that I've come across a person in local government that isn't willing to support their colleagues both within and outside their own council, which is a wonderful asset that we've got in the sector.
Very, very true. And it certainly comes to the fore in times of crisis, as we've talked with others on this program, particularly through the floods last year. So was being a CEO always the aim? Because I do want to understand why you went off to IBAC for a time and appeared to be moving away from local government.
Yeah, I'd like to understand that too. I'm not really sure. Look, to be honest, so to answer your first question, no, being a CEO wasn't always my ambition. In fact, for many years, I was really clear that that wasn't my goal. Ever since I was in customer service, my ambition was always to be a corporate services director. That was a role where I thought I could really make a difference. I could shape and guide the way the organisation worked, and I can support people. That was what really attracted me to that role. And I was so fortunate to get the director of corporate, it was actually corporate performance role at City of Greater Bendigo, which was, one of the best roles that I've had in my career. And Greater Bendigo is such an exciting place to work. Craig Neiman's such a brilliant CEO. It was just an amazing opportunity. But I had quite a strong governance background prior to that and continued that in the role at Bendigo, which I really loved. And that was probably that governance and integrity element that attracted me to the role at IBAC. And I was also interested in, not necessarily, it was never really about leaving local government. I always had it in my mind that I would come back, but I liked the idea of broadening my perspective and seeing the world, I guess, from the state government perspective, but also understanding in a bit more depth, that sort of integrity space. And look, I absolutely loved it. I was only at IBAC for a couple of years, but it was a really, really interesting experience, and I learnt a lot in that short time. And I was really fortunate that towards the end of my time at IBAC, Marlo Baragwanath was appointed, who's still the CEO, and she's just amazing. And I learned, even though I only crossed paths with her for a few months, I learned a lot from her. But the role came up at South Gippsland, and I was approached by Fisher Leadership, who were handling the recruitment. And when the consultant from Fisher explained to me what he thought and the administrators thought they needed in a CEO, the match was really good. They needed somebody with strong governance experience and somebody that was committed and capable of really supporting and transforming the organisation and supporting people that had had a pretty tough time. And I thought, well, I can do that. Why don't I have a go?
And of course, now you're a Gippslander, effectively. This is your first role down in Gippsland, isn't it?
It's my first role in Gippsland. And as of September last year, my husband and I have also moved to Gippsland, and we absolutely love it. It is just an amazing region, and it's such a beautiful place. And South Gippsland is, I think, one of the most beautiful parts of Victoria. So it's a real privilege to work here.
Let's talk a bit about current circumstances, issues, challenges, etc. You spoke a little bit about being really pleased with the result of the election, with what you got in terms of a council, and you're hoping many of those will put their hand up again. A lot of that, though, comes down to the work that you put into developing prospective candidates in the community leading up to the election, didn't it?
Yeah, there's definitely a role, I think, for councils to play in supporting the development of leadership in the community, not just for the purposes of running for council, but for all the great things that community leaders do. One of the things that was a recommendation of the Commission of Inquiry report into South Gippsland was that we deliver a community leadership program. And we commenced that under the administrators prior to the election. It's still running to this day. It's actually happening at the moment. And that was a fantastic opportunity for the amazing community leaders that we have in South Gippsland to both grow and develop and be supported to expand their skills, but also to meet other leaders and to learn a bit about local government. As we know, there's a lot of people out there that really don't know much about local government at all. it might be amazing councillors, but they've just never given it any thought. So it was an opportunity for some of those leaders to think about whether or not running for council might be something that they'd like to do at some stage. And we had a number of candidates that ran for council that had completed the program. And I'm really proud to say we have one amazing councillor to this day who completed the program in Councillor Claire Williams. So, you know, I think it's that investment in community leadership. But the other thing that we did was run, again, in partnership with VLGA, actually, a number of candidate information forums where people could just hear a bit about what it's really like to be a councillor, what's involved, and what the difference is that you can make in your community in this unique role.
And I think a lot of elements of that model, if not all of them, have been picked up at Whittlesea and possibly at Casey as well, as they head towards a return to elected representation as well. You mentioned Steve Cooper before, friend of the program, regular visitor, not as regular as he used to be, sadly, but he did reach out very recently to say how impressed he was with your community satisfaction survey results. And I understand now that he's got a bit of an interest in those outcomes. Pretty big turnaround in terms of the community perceptions of the council, wasn't it?
Oh, huge shift. We came off back in 2018 and 19 of probably the lowest community satisfaction results that I've ever seen in my time in local government. And, you know, for good reason. I think there was a perception in the community that the councillors were more interested in themselves and fighting amongst themselves than they were in supporting and working for the community. And to be quite honest, I think the Commission of Inquiry report demonstrated that the community was probably right. That perception was probably fair. And where we've come to since has been, a 180-degree turnaround. And that did start under the time of the administrators, but it's a huge credit to the councillor group that has not only continued, but we're now at a point where on some of those key measures, we're actually leading the state. And that's particularly around that community leadership, community engagement type role, which our councillor group, all 9 of them, have made a really strong commitment to working with and for the community, listening to the community, engaging with the community in a meaningful way. And the community's noticed and they're really appreciating it, which is fantastic to see.
What are the big issues at the moment? And we need to wrap this up because I know you've got a busy schedule. Current challenges, the issues, the things that keep you awake at night. What's at the top of that list for you?
Not much keeps me awake at night, to be honest, Chris. But the biggest challenge for South Gippsland at the moment, but it's also I think our biggest opportunity, is that Gippsland was the first declared renewable energy zone, which will, amongst other things, involve offshore wind coming to our region, not necessarily directly in South Gippsland, but certainly our region. And I think it's a huge opportunity for us to be part of that carbon neutral future. The Gippsland region, as everyone's well aware, has had a really strong history of providing power to the state through the Latrobe Valley. And that's a really a history that we're really proud of as a region. But we have I think, unique opportunity now to build a renewable and carbon neutral energy future. So I'm really quite excited about the role that South Gippsland can play in that space, and also what that might mean for future jobs and for our young people, learning and development opportunities, and also just a chance to be part of a sustainable future for Victoria. So that's an exciting time. And then the other thing that I think is on most CEOs' minds at the moment is around attracting, retaining and developing a skilled workforce. We've been really, really fortunate in South Gippsland that our turnover rate was very high when I started, probably for obvious reasons. It's now one of the lowest in the state, and we've got an incredibly capable leadership team. But it's always just about that next opportunity to make sure that we're still attracting really talented people to our organisation.
Some of your neighbours have been pretty vocal recently about the government's decision to end native timber logging. Is that as big an issue for South Gippsland as it is for some of those other municipalities?
Not directly. We have plantations in South Gippsland. We don't have native timber logging, but we're certainly very aware of the impact it's going to have on the region, and very supportive of our neighbours, particularly Latrobe, East Gippsland and Wellington. from my perspective, it's not so much the decision itself, it's the suddenness with which it was brought forward, and the lack of, I suppose, detail and planning around supporting those communities to transition to a different future. We know that that takes time. And I'd really like to see more support for some of those communities to build new industries so that the communities can continue to thrive.
Kerryn, we're going to have to leave it there. It's been great to talk with you, and I thank you so much for being so open with us about your journey and your current challenges at South Gippsland. Well done on what you've achieved thus far, and all the best for what's to come.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Kerryn Ellis is the CEO at South Gippsland Shire Council, our guest today on Local Leaders from VLGA Connect.